say the questions, we're welcoming questions. If you could raise your hand in person or virtually, but if you could keep it to the end. There's also an email address which hopefully will appear on the screen soon that you could send questions to if you'd like. The only other housekeeping matter for me is to note that this session is being recorded, so just so that you're conscious of that. We have 2 guest speakers speaking today. So Jo Harper's here and she'll be talking about ASIC's digital strategy. And then we have Cassie Swatai who will be speaking about ASIC's regulatory efficiency unit and especially the work that it's doing that's relevant to ASIC's licensing function. Then we've got, of course, the senior members of the licensing team, Peng, Jared and Nicholas, will be speaking about the licensing team's performance over the last year, the work we're doing on a new licensing portal, and finally sort of some of the recent work in relation to licensing reforms and other sort of related work. But I'm going to begin by making a few introductory comments. First thing to know, so as I said, I'm the Executive Director of the Financial Services and Wealth team at ASIC. The licensing team joined the Financial Services and Wealth group at the beginning of this calendar year. The other sort of teams that are in the Financial Services and Wealth group are the Credit and Banking team, the Financial Advice team, the Insurers team, the Investment Managers team, the Superannuation team, and our Institutional Supervision team, which is the team that does a close sort of monitoring and supervision of the large 4 banks. So essentially, you know, the rest of the team is really, I suppose, the frontline regulators of financial services and credit in Australia. The team is largely focused on ASIC's consumer protection mandate, and then of course the market side of ASIC's business is largely focused on market integrity, but that's a little bit simple. We do both sides are focused on both statutory objectives. The Financial Services and Wealth team really uses all of ASIC's regulatory tools to protect financial services consumers and to respond to other harms in the system. So, you know, we do policy and guidance, we do surveillance, monitoring and supervision, we do administrative enforcement, we do stakeholder engagement, and now we do licensing. Okay. Okay. If you're not speaking, it would be really helpful if you went on mute. Which I think I've just done. I hope people can still hear me. Anyhow, okay. So the team, Financial Services and Wealth team, does everything really apart from the court-based enforcement work in the credit and financial services side. We had thought that there would be many benefits from the licensing team joining the Financial Services and Wealth group, and actually I think we've, even in the short time that licensing has been part of the Financial Services and Wealth group, we've really been able to realise those benefits. We're seeing a much better exchange of information between the licensing team and the frontline regulators of the various industry sectors in which the license entities operate. The licensing team and the sort of stakeholder teams can work to get much better on regulatory issues. So that's been particularly important recently in relation to a whole lot of law reforms that we've had to implement. So we've had the licensing team and the investment management team have been able to work really closely together on the corporate collective investment vehicle reforms, and then the credit and banking team and the licensing team have worked very closely together on the implementation of licensing of debt management firms. We've also been able to see the licensing team work together on sort of regulatory problems, which has been helpful. And also we have a sort of scope to have more flexible resource allocation across the whole group. And of course, we're also really pleased to have Peng join, you know, as a senior member of the FSW leadership team. So that's sort of the structural move. I wanted to talk now a little bit about ASIC's priorities. There we go, I've got the agenda there. I wanted to talk a bit more about ASIC's priorities. So we put out our corporate plan in August this year. That's obviously the best place to go to if you're looking for some sort of information on ASIC's priorities In that plan, we've set out our 4 strategic priorities for the coming year. Those priorities will be reviewed annually, but the proposal is that, we're hoping, unlike other previous years, that they won't turn over every year, that these are things that we hope will be a sort of meaningful priority for us to focus on for a number of years. On the other hand, we will, of course, review them annually. So the first of those strategic priorities is product design and distribution. We want to sort of reduce the risk of harm to consumers of financial and credit products caused by poor product design, distribution and marketing, especially by focusing on the sort of new law reforms that we've got. And there, the design and distribution obligations are clearly the key focus. And, if you're a keen follower of ASIC's media releases, you will have seen that we've already made really quite significant use of the DDO powers, and they're turning out to be what they promised, in a sense, a sort of game changer that's enabling us to take pretty quick action where we're seeing poor products, or more accurately, I suppose, products being marketed to the wrong people. The second priority is sustainable finance. So we want to support market integrity through proactive supervision and enforcement of governance, transparency and disclosure standards in relation to sustainable finance. The third priority is retirement decision making, so protecting consumers, especially as they plan and make decisions for retirement. Obviously, we're focusing there on superannuation products and managed investments to an extent, because we often see managed investment products being really being targeted at people on the verge of retirement. And when people on the verge of retirement make sort of bad decisions about managed investment products, that can be really damaging. And also, obviously, we're focusing on financial advice under that priority. And the final priority is technology risk. We want to focus on the impacts of technology in financial markets and services to drive good cyber risk and operational resilience practices, clearly something that's pretty topical at the moment, and also to address digitally enabled misconduct, including scams, also pretty topical at the moment. So those are the 4 big strategic priorities that ASIC has, and various teams within ASIC have strategic projects that relate to those priorities on foot at the moment. We also have 8 cross ASIC big projects going on, what we call the Big 8. 3 of them are really related to sort of law reform and implementing them. So we have the Reportable Situations program, which I'm leading, and that's really to make sure that the new breach reporting regime is working effectively, and that we can sort of deal with the implementation issues that licensees are experiencing, and also that ASIC's experiencing with that regime. Then we've got the financial accountability regime. The legislation is been introduced into Parliament, currently in committee, but it should come into play pretty soon. And then finally, the design and distribution obligations. Then we've got 3 other priorities that really about really topical issues in the market at the moment, and they do line up with the strategic priorities. So those are scams, cyber, crypto products, and ESG or greenwashing. And then we've got our final Big 8, which I suppose Jo Harper will touch on, is a sort of much more internally focused one on our digital and data work and capacity. The final thing I wanted to talk to you about before I let Jo and Cassie talk is about the FRA, the Financial Regulator Assessment Authority, which you may be aware of. It was a body that was established after the Financial Services Royal Commission. It's an independent statutory body that's tasked with assessing and reporting on the effectiveness and capability of both ASIC and APRA. So it's comprised of sort of 3 part-time members. The current 3 members are Nicholas Moore, who's the chair, so the former CEO of Macquarie Bank, Fiona Crosby, who's the chair of the law firm Allens, and Craig Drummond, who used to be the CEO of Medibank and before that was in the finance industry, most recently in NAB. When we started the process, we also had Gina Cass-Gottlieb. Well, actually, Fiona placed Gina, but Gina obviously then moved on to become chair of the ACCC. So that's the FRA. There's just the three of them, but they're supported by a secretariat from Treasury. They've done their first review of ASIC, and they've now moved on, and they're doing their first review of APRA. For ASIC, they looked at our strategic prioritisation process and our surveillance, and thirdly, and most relevantly to you, is they looked at licensing. They found that ASIC was generally effective and capable in each of the three areas that they looked at, but they did make a number of really useful recommendations. So the key recommendations were that ASIC, first of all, ASIC requires a substantial uplift in its data and technology capability. Secondly, that ASIC should have a stronger focus across the organisation on enhancing the quality of its engagement with stakeholders. Thirdly, that ASIC should enhance its ability to measure its own effectiveness and capability and communicate the outcomes of those assessments transparently, both internally and externally. And finally, that ASIC should broaden its mix of skill sets to ensure it can meet the current and future needs of the organisation. So I think all of those recommendations would resonate with you. They resonate with ASIC. ASIC wouldn't quibble with any of those recommendations, and they're all also really apposite for the licensing area. So I'm sure that, you know, they are relevant to you. Other findings in the licensing area were that industry stakeholders expressed frustrations with the licensing portal. Again, that's not something that we would quibble with, and Peng will talk about what we're doing there. Industry stakeholders reported procedural inconsistencies in their licensing application, noting the process appeared to vary depending on the analysts assigned. And again, that's an issue that we're conscious of and have processes in train to address. Some stakeholders reported frustrations around difficulties contacting ASIC, and again, that's something that we'll address. Respondents also expressed frustration with the timeliness of licensing decisions, but the FRA did note that those claims were not actually necessarily supported by the data about ASIC's licensing process, and that ASIC's timelines were in line with or ahead of other peer regulators. Nevertheless, they encouraged ASIC to be ambitious in reducing licensing timelines, and we're always up for being ambitious. So I'm going to hold it there. Just for those people that missed, I'm going to remind you that we'll take questions at the end. And I think yes, the email is up there if you wanted to email a question, but otherwise we can take questions in person or through Teams. And I just want to say I have to duck out at 11, so I just wanted to warn you that I'll be leaving. But now I'm going to hand over to Jo Harper. Thanks. It's a sort of morning of Jo's.
Why Jo Harper? We should have got Jo Longo in as well. We could have really done it. So thanks everybody and for giving me the opportunity to come and talk. So I'm Jo Harper and I'm the Senior Executive at ASIC who's been charged with our digital transformation. Firstly, I wanted to say thanks to Jo and Peng for giving me the opportunity to spruik our digital work today. They both know that I will talk for hours on digital, so sit back. No, I promise I won't, but I will look if, you know, I'm being told to, you know, move it along. So it's great actually to be able to talk in person and to actually be here and to kind of see everybody and be able to do these presentations in that way. So look, many of you have heard Jo Longo talking about our digital ambitions, and I think almost right off the bat when he joined our organisation, one of the observations that he made is that he felt we needed to be a more digitally enabled regulator and that we needed to be ambitious in that area. So he's been in the paper internally and internally as well, talking about his ambitions in that. And so I guess a lot of you have probably thought, well, that's good to say, but what does that actually mean when you say you're going to be a digitally enabled regulator? Jo touched on some of the things that the FRA commented on around our digital and capabilities, and if you haven't had an opportunity to read the FRA report, it's long, but it does make for some interesting reading. And you know, for me in particular, it does make a lot of observations around our digital capabilities and where we need to uplift them, and particularly in the licensing area. So not necessarily in response to the prior, we'd already started to do this, but we've set up a digital transformation program of work. And one of the first things we've done is we've set up a digital vision, and we've got some principles behind it to support that vision. And I thought today I would talk broadly about what our vision is and the principles behind it, and then invite you to contact me, talk to me separately if you want to talk in some detail specifically around your areas and concerns that you have. So our digital vision is that by 2030, ASIC will be a leading digitally enabled, data-informed regulator. So what does that actually mean? Let's break that down a little bit. 2030 seems a long way away, and it is a long way away, but what we want to signal is this is a large transformation for ASIC. This isn't just a quick, let's implement some software and some different tools. This is actually a fundamental rethink about the way that we do things, given the digital age. The government also has a digital economy agenda 2030, and we wanted to be in line with that. Didn't actually want to look like we were kind of trying to jump ahead of their 2030 agenda. But the fact that we put 2030 doesn't mean that we're going to wait until 2030 to start delivering. In fact, we're starting to deliver right now, and the licensing stream is one of the spearheads of some of the work that we're doing under our principles. And Peng will talk a little bit about that in detail, and I'll talk a bit as we talk under the principles about what that means. So leading, ambitious, but we want to be recognised by our peers nationally, so our other regulators domestically, and also internationally. We want to be recognised as leading in this area. Digitally enabled, I'll touch on that as we go through the principles. Data informed. So sometimes people have asked, or some people have asked me, why data informed and why not data driven? We were very specific in saying that we wanted to be data informed and not data driven. The kind of industry that we work with and that we regulate means that we can't be solely driven by data decisions. There are a whole bunch of things that come into the way that we work, and we wanted to reflect that while data is a very big part of the work that we do, it's not solely the only thing that we rely upon. So let's now talk about what each of those principles are that we hope kind of bring that vision to life. So the first one's about remaining relevant and resilient to change. I probably don't have to tell anyone in this room here that we regulate a really digitally mature sector. So the financial sector is very digitally mature. They're very innovative. There are a lot of products out there that we, constantly get new products. You think of crypto, NFTs, all those sorts of things. So it's really important that we have the digital capacity and the digital smarts within our organisation to be able to effectively regulate that industry. Also remaining relevant is also about the fact that everything is increasing. The complexity of what we do, the volume of what we do, everything is increasing, and it's on an exponential curve. For us to be able to keep up with that, we can't continue to throw manual resources at it. We have to do things differently, and we have to look at how we can use digital to help us to do that. Promoting innovation. Some of you might go, is it really ASIC's role to promote innovation? Is that really what you should be doing? And people within ASIC have kind of questioned that as well. But if you think about ASIC's vision of where we want to be a fair, strong and efficient financial sector, anything that we can do to help drive towards that vision is important. And we believe that supporting RegTechs to help with compliance, making compliance easy, supporting SupTechs to help us to be able to do supervisory work better has got to be a good thing. And so when we say that we're going to promote innovation, we're saying that we'll promote innovation. We will actively encourage and we'll actively support innovation that's going to help us to achieve our vision. Making it easy to do business with ASIC. So this is actually my personal favourite. I, like all of us, well, not like all of us, but I have a number of friends in the financial sector, and when I go to dinner parties, a favourite topic of conversation is how difficult ASIC is to deal with digitally, and why haven't you fixed that, Joe? I'm pretty sure most of you would know, right through from our website, through to our portals, we could do better. We absolutely could do better, and that's what this is all about. It's about using technologies to make sure that it's easy to do the right thing and hard to do the wrong thing, and supporting you. And Peng will talk about our ambitions for our digital or our uplift of our licensing systems. So this is a really, really important one to us. We've kicked off a piece of work where we're looking across all of the digital interactions that we have externally. We're mapping those out. We're looking at the pain points and we're looking at what we should look like. And my vision is that we have an integrated system which is intuitive. You tell us something once, we know it. You don't have to keep re-entering it. My personal favourite is where we ask you for information and we ask you to put it into a Dropbox. And then we come back and we say, actually, we can only keep it in the Dropbox for 5 days for security reasons and we didn't actually get to it. So could you pop it in the Dropbox again? Not a really good experience. And that's the kind of things that we want to address, and Peng and his team are pushing really strongly to have addressed as part of the licensing uplift. A workforce that's fit for the digital age. So we're really at varying levels across ASIC with our digital capability. I'll be really kind of honest about that. And this isn't just about training people up and telling them that you will be digital. This is about fundamentally looking at the way that we do things, and it's about making sure that it's actually built into our DNA that we do things digitally, and that where we have an increase in the volume of things that we have to do, or we have a complexity change, that we don't look to say, well, throw more manual resources at it. We look to go, well, how can we do it more digitally? And how can we provide a better experience for those internally and externally that we deal with? And that's really important to us. Some of you may have heard me use the example of typing pools, that when I first started work over 30 years ago, we all had typing pools, and you would send your typing off to the typing pool and they'd have to read your terrible writing and it would often come back, but seemed to be no resemblance to what you'd sent off to the typing pool. Now we would not assume that we would ever send things off. Everyone does their own typing. This is part of trying to get the digital uplift within ASIC, where people just say digital is the way that we do things. And lastly, it's automation, and that's about intelligently automating what we do. So it's not automation for the sake of automation. It's looking at the things that we do. It's looking for those really high intensive, really manual, error-prone things that we do, and looking at how we could automate those. And we've got a piece of work underway at the moment where we're setting up what I consider to be like our automation factory, where we're going to go across the organisation and look for those things that we can do more efficiently. So that really was what I wanted to talk about. Again, it's not something that's going to happen overnight. It's a really long journey that we're on. We are keen to transform the way that we work. We're very keen to take advantage of things, the contemporary things like user-centric design, making sure that we put the people that have to deal with our systems at the centre of it. And that means that we'll be out talking. And I know Peng's team are already starting to talk to a lot of you around the licensing systems. So I do not make this as a light offer, but if anyone wants to talk to me about it, you can get to us through the licensing email. You can contact me. I'm really happy to talk about the pain points and about what would make a better experience for you. So thank you. I'm going to hand over to Cassie, who I think is online.
Thank you, Jo, and hopefully you can all hear me okay. It's great to meet you all virtually, and thank you for the opportunity to talk to you about our efficiency work. I'm Cassandra Swidday. I'm an analyst in the Regulatory Efficiency Unit, also known as the REU, and I'll be focusing on our stakeholder engagement work today. But before we look at this, I'll just provide a brief background about the unit and the work that's occurred over the last 12 months. So in November last year, ASIC established the Regulatory Efficiency Unit, which sits in the Office of the Chair team. And the unit leads ASIC's work to assess and identify efficiencies in how we administer the law. And I'll note that this work is focused on the law as it exists today and how it's administered from a functional perspective. So overall, we are seeking to really produce efficiency and effectiveness benefits for both you, our stakeholders, and also ASIC in achieving our market integrity and consumer protection outcomes. So earlier in the year, we consulted widely. We spoke to more than 70 stakeholders to find out how we could streamline our interactions and engagement, how we could do this more efficiently and remove any unnecessary frictions. So thank you to those here who may have provided input to that process. We now have 3 initiatives underway that were recently endorsed by our Commission, and these initiatives are really about making it easier for you to interact and engage with us. So looking at our work plan, you'll see that there have been 3 key stages of our work. We are now in the last stage of this work plan, which is the implementation of the 3 initiatives. So the 3 initiatives focus on the development and maintenance of our regulatory guidance, the use of information gathering powers and scene setting investigation meetings, and lastly, and most relevant to you today, stakeholder engagement and the user experience. So for each tranche of work, we are considering our current approaches, testing ideas, thinking about new ways to do what we do. And as we work on the 3 initiatives, we will be using the information provided to us during those consultation meetings earlier in the year, as well as the findings and recommendations of the FRA, the Financial Regulator Assessment Authority, which Jo Bird and Jo Harper mentioned earlier. It's also important to note that these initiatives are being implemented alongside existing work on enhancing our systems and the user experience, as Jo Harper mentioned in her presentation, and that's expected to see many efficiency benefits too. So looking at the 3 initiatives in a bit more detail, on the first initiative, we are really here trying to review both how we develop and also update our guidance. So we aim to publish a regulatory development timetable and trying to look at how we can better coordinate how we maintain our existing guidance. So we have taken into account our views from stakeholders about how we implement and communicate our guidance and any related feedback. We will also be considering how we can support you and our stakeholders to plan for and manage these changes more effectively. On the second initiative, we are looking at how we can improve our approach to the use of compulsory information gathering powers and our engagement with entities under investigation. And this is really to ensure that the engagement is transparent, it's targeted, it's efficient, and people understand the steps involved in the investigation. So we will also be testing the effectiveness of our engagement with recipients of notice requests, as well as where appropriate, the practice of meeting with entities before we begin a complex or significant investigation. And finally, we are reviewing our stakeholder engagement approach, and this includes a case study of our engagement with licence applicants and external service providers. So this last initiative is most relevant to you, and I'll go into a bit more detail about this and its 2 work streams. So on this slide, there's 2 work streams for this initiative. The first work stream is about our broader stakeholder engagement approach, and this is all about reviewing our current practices and thinking about the perspective and overall cultural approach we take to engagement more broadly. And so we're hoping that the insights that we gather from our review or our stock take will help to inform us with possible enhancements that may relate to the nature, the scale, or even the substance of our current approach. And I might just add that findings from the stock take could include, for example, use of more multi-channel engagement, engagement that is tailored for a sector, but part of a holistic approach. There may also be mechanisms to consider for enhancing how we capture information and intelligence from these engagements. But on timing, we are finalising our stock take and we're starting to review the findings. We will then be considering next steps for this work, including those possible enhancements by the end of this financial year. On our second work stream, this is about a case study. It's really focused on your experience. So the experience of AFS license applicants, external service providers, where you're applying for a license. So the case study will use several experiments to test different approaches to enhancing our engagement, and these are being rolled out at various stages. So this work will complement other ongoing initiatives to enhance our licensing function, but at a high level, the approaches include pre-lodgement guidance, pre-assessment meetings, contact ahead of information requests, increased use of phone calls, more people to contact at ASIC, reduced time between that contact, and a post-application survey. So the impact of each of these approaches will be measured and will help to inform us about potential enhancements, and that will hopefully become part of business as usual for our licensing team. And on timing for this work stream, ASIC is currently running the case study and will review some early findings next month. And then this will be followed by measuring and reviewing the full impact of the case study by the end of this financial year as well. But Peng and the team can help with any questions you might have on the case study during the Q&A. But overall, these two work streams together seek to really help you better understand our priorities, our expectations, our decisions. And I will just note that the first initiative on regulatory guidance, the second initiative on our notices and investigations work, and ASIC's digital transformation work are all very closely related to this initiative, and they do complement each other. So we will be making connections between all the initiatives and existing work. So we will look to engage with stakeholders to test whether these initiatives are helping us to administer the law more effectively. So for example, we might reach out to canvass relevant proposals, seek feedback at various stages of this work. But to end, this work really again is making it, or trying to make it as easy as possible for you to interact with us. And we will continue to have this front of mind as we move throughout this last stage. But as Joe Harper mentioned, we're also very open to any ideas or thoughts that you might have or would like to share with us. If you've got any questions as well, please don't hesitate to get in touch. We have an email address on the slide, so it's reu@asic.gov.au. But please feel free to contact us, and thanks very much for the opportunity to present to you.
Great, thanks a lot, Cass. Hi everyone, it's really great to see so many of you here today after 2 sessions in the last 2 years being virtual. Didn't think that we'd see when we would be back in face-to-face meetings, so welcome to you all. So I'm going to do our usual presentation in relation to how we've performed over the last 12 months. So we might just move on to the first slide. So as you'll see from this, the majority of our efforts are obviously focused on the AFS space, where approximately 68% of matters come through that channel, and then credit matters are approximately 25%, and the remaining is just in relation to the auditor work that we do. Turning to the trend of lodgements over the last 3 years, so you'll see from this graph that the black line is the most current last 12 months, and the blue line the previous 12 months, and you can see from that there's a big jump in the number of applications that we received in that period of about April to June, and that's a result of the reforms that the government introduced in relation to claims handling and debt management. So from that you'll see that again the trend line, the dark one, is the current last 12 months, and you'll see that our work on hand obviously jumped as a result of all those applications being received over that period of time. But the good news story there is that we, from the end of the August period of the last year through to the declining black line, that we're bringing our work on hand matters down quite significantly. as well. And that there's a range of between like 1,200 at its peak to down to about 750. In terms of finalised matters, that's also borne out by, again, the black line being across the board roughly above the dotted blue line, which has shown that we completed 35% more applications in the last 12 months than we did in the prior year. In terms of the specifics of the breakdown of those matters for new applications, you can see there that our work on hand is dropping. That's the grey bar falling over that period of time, and our KEIs roughly are within that range of 70 to 80%, with a bit of a hit in the middle of that slide. And then turning to variation applications, again, kind of similar story with a trending down of matters, but a bit more fluctuation in our completion rates. There, it's obviously an area which we're going to focus on now that volumes have dropped off a little bit more than previously, so we can get those numbers up. And in terms of credit applications, again, trending down. We've been pretty strong, as with previous years, with our completion rates. As a result of having to focus on the AFS space, there's been a bit of a dip in the KEI completion rates, as you can see from the black line there as well. And similarly for variation applications, again, that's pretty strong, so nothing really to mention there. And there's falling volumes in the last 3 or 4 months of the last period. And then company auditors, so we will see there that there's a bit of a jump, a bit of a drop in terms of our completion rates. So we've had for many years 2 dedicated analysts who work on auditor applications, and around April, one of them decided to go on long service leave, and then had such a good time that they decided that they'd retire. So we lost their skill set. So we've been training up some new staff members, and as you see from that slide, from the black trend line, that our completion rates are also now improving. And pretty similar story to with SMSF auditors. And as usual, both from this slide and the previous one, we obviously get an increase in the number of registration applications that we receive in the period leading up to and past the end of the financial year, as more partners get appointed to those roles. So we tend to have to deal with a bit of a lump at that period of time. Turning now to just our overall service charter performance levels. So across the board, on average, we were able to achieve 70% within 150 days and 90% within 240 days. So we were pleased with that. But when you break down the specifics of the particular metrics that we measure, which are on the slide there, there are actually 8 metrics that we use, and we met it in 5 of the 8 categories. And you'll see from the red numbered items that we did quite make it there in relation to variation applications at 67%, and we were just shy of meeting the mark for variation applications and new credit over the 240-day mark. Okay, however, despite that, I think we feel that we've performed strongly. As I mentioned before, we completed 35% more matters over the last 12 months than we did the prior 12 months, and notwithstanding that we received 30% more applications during that period. So I feel like we're getting greater efficiencies out of our system and our processes. And also another thing to call out is that with having joined FSW, we've been given a little bit more resources to deal with our workload. But we've had a bit of turnover over that period of time, which you probably would have noticed in dealing with the analysts over that period. And approximately 30% of our staff have joined for less than 13 months, and almost half of those are since July this year. So it's a pretty big change that we're going through at the moment in terms of training those up. But looking at our overall performance over the last 12 months, as broken down to the volume of 25%, 50%, 70% and 90%. You'll see from the red line, which is the current year's numbers, that we basically hit the same kind of number of days for the 25% and the 70% volume numbers. We took a bit of a hit on the 50% numbers in not quite getting to the same level of completion rate, but the good news is for the 90% mark, we brought that down by by about a month. So that was pleasing to see. Okay, so that's just that in the table. Outcomes of finalised applications. So you'll see from this slide that approximately 81% of applications that were lodged for AFS were approved, and in the credit space 66%. In terms of the number that were rejected for lodgement, around about 10% for both AFS and credit. And in terms of the withdrawals, there was about twice the number of withdrawals in the credit space as AFS after ASIC had completed its assessment and given feedback that the applicant was probably unlikely to be granted a licence based on the submission and information provided, and probably might be the first year that we've gone through without any refused decisions having to be made. So that's I think that's a first. And then turning finally to the additional regulatory outcomes that we achieved. So the biggest intervention that we imposed was a key person condition, where in terms of the credit, in terms of the AFS space, it's about 25%, and in the credit space, almost 40%, if I can read that from here. And then in terms of the next highest level of authorisation changes, it was in terms of either granting authorisations needing to be varied to provide more services in order to be able to provide the services, or that we felt the competency of some of the applicants weren't sufficient to be able to grant all the authorisations that were being sought, with the breakdown there. The other thing to probably call out, and you can see obviously there that 77% of AFS applications had a specific tailoring to their conditions, so not too many. And in terms of additional responsible managers, again, quite a low number were required to have additional managers appointed, and again, the additional conditions impose quite a low percentage there as well. Okay, so I'll concludes the discussion about our performance over the last 12 months. So now I'll turn quickly to look at the licensing portal and our roundtable discussions. So we've started, as Joe Harper mentioned earlier, we've started our work on building the new licensing portal. We got funding for that at the start of July, and we expect that that will take approximately 18 months to implement, after which we will move on to work on the credit and auditor and liquidator portals. We've obviously got the SMSF one across the line already. This will involve three parts of work. So the first and obviously the most important to you here today is the front end licensing portal, where we'll be redesigning the application form. We're going to have a smart form which will embed some more specific guidance to assist you in knowing really what information to supply to us. Obviously the form was designed, the FS01 and FS03 were designed a long time ago, more than 20 years ago, and obviously follows a linear process of questioning. And obviously we've received lots of feedback that, you know, there's lots of things that have changed over that period of time. So we'll be making changes to make that much more user friendly. The second part of it is our internal workflow. So what we'll be doing there is creating more procedural touch points, more data for our analysts. They'll be able to look at a huge data set that we get from all the different breach reports and reports of misconduct that people have to go through, the analysts have to go through in order to determine whether there are any fit and proper issues or any other compliance matters that might concern us. And part of the new technology uplift will be to provide greater automation and with the use of machine learning and natural language processing to be able to get to what we need to understand and evaluate much more quickly than we currently do. Yeah, and then the final aspect of that is obviously the related aspect of the technology in order to be able to provide better analytics to make those decisions more quickly. Now turning to our stakeholder engagement, which is kind of one of our key catch cry themes going forward for the next little while. So we've had our roundtable discussions specific to the licensing portal work, and thank you for those of you who participated in those. We found them extremely useful, appreciated the candid and honest feedback. We learned a lot from that process, and we're obviously open to having more roundtable discussions in the future should that be warranted. In terms of the surveys, so we'll be doing obviously a larger number of surveys than we've done in order to get feedback from you all, and very much strongly encourage you to participate in that feedback. We did a survey as part of the launch of the roundtable invitations, and we got a small number of responses from the survey. Again, the information that was provided was extremely helpful. Encourage you to participate in future surveys that we are going to be rolling out. Again, user experience testing, as Jo Harper mentioned before, I'm sure she'll be getting inundated with requests from you at some stage, but once we build a appropriate prototype that we can show to you all, then we'll be testing that to see that we've kind of hit the mark in terms of the information capture that we require and the ease of which you have with getting through the application process. And as mentioned previously, there'll be specific engagement points and a clearer pathway to resolving issues. Some of you may have already been receiving new acknowledgement letters for applications if you've lodged any in the last couple of weeks. We're providing much more transparency about how you can escalate matters to us. From the survey, I think there was about 60% of people said that they didn't know who to go to if they had a matter that they needed to escalate if they had an issue with an analyst. So we've addressed that through this acknowledgement letter. We've also introduced a process where now you'll be dealing on your applications with both an analyst and a supervisor. So the supervisor will have greater visibility given the turnover that we've had and the new starters that we've had on come on board. We think that that's a much better model to ensure that we can make our decisions more consistently. And so, yeah, you'll see that coming through. And as mentioned earlier as well, there'll be more specific touch points as the handling and assessment of the matter progresses. Okay, so I'll now hand over to Nick to go through some of the specific.
Thank you. Sorry, thank you, Peng, and hi, everybody. I'm just going to briefly go through the themes that we received as part of the survey, the responses, the feedback, as well as the, at a high level, what we heard in the roundtable. You know, there was a lot of consistent themes throughout both the survey and that those roundtables. So we received 25 survey responses. Overall, mixed feedback, but about 60% of people rated essentially their interactions with licensing as positive, although there were a high number, about a third of respondents did have concerns and a negative interaction with ASIC. We asked people what we thought a reasonable timeframe for award of a licence would be. Our service charter provides for 70% of decisions to be made within 150 days on a new licence. 88% of people thought 90 days or 90 days would be a reasonable timeframe. So it's clearly consistent with that messaging we received FRA about concerns about timeliness. In terms of the application questions, it was a consistent theme that the application was outdated and that we asked questions that were either unnecessary, duplicative, or contained information that we already held. So it's something we've clearly heard and something we'll incorporate into the work that we're doing that Ping just gave an overview of. We asked questions about our regulatory guidance. So that's the licensing guidance, the licensing kit, as well as Organisational Competence 105, 126 and 166. Mixed views on its helpfulness. 54% of people said it's helpful. I think there's clearly some something we can do there to lift those numbers, to look at that guidance and to make it far more instructive and useful for people. Much better responses in relation to requisitions, the need for the requisitions and what we did with those requisitions. Nearly 80% of people agreed that where we asked for further information in an application, we gave due consideration to the responses, that in general we needed that information and we used it as part of our assessment. 50% though said that we didn't really provide an explanation for why we needed to get that information. Oh, sorry, 50%, sorry, I should say, that we didn't provide a clear explanation when we didn't agree to the responses that we received. As Peng mentioned, also flagged that people just weren't aware of how they could escalate either to a supervisor or to the senior management group. So again, that's something we've looked at, and towards the end of the presentation, we'll give you all our email addresses, in addition to the changes to our initial letters, which provide far more detail about who to talk to. So the portals the portal roundtables we conducted over the last few weeks. We ran 6 sessions in Brisbane, Sydney and Melbourne. There was a lot of consistent feedback that we received across all those sessions. A lot of detail, and we don't have time to go through that detail today, but at a very high level, we've wrapped up the themes into 4. First, some really clear feedback in relation to our regulatory guidance and our info sheet. So specific issues in relation to Organisational Competence 105, 166 particularly, a lot of feedback on the financial resource requirements. We've taken all that on board, and that's clearly going to be part of our project, and we will have some new regulatory guidance. Other feedback was concern that we used information sheets in lieu of updating our regulatory guidance. So we've heard that. A lot of feedback on substantive issues. So it's absolutely consistent with what Joe already said about what FRA thought. So there was concern about the consistency of our assessments, that the timing or the outcome of the application or the questions asked may depend on specific analysts, or it's up to things that an applicant might not know. So that consistency was raised multiple times. How we approached organisational competence and responsible managers. So a lot of discussion about whether the RM model was fit for purpose and whether we should be looking at a new model for assessing organisational competence. A lot of feedback on fit and proper person checks, the difficulty on an individual basis to obtain checks for everybody, and about our approach to requiring checks, particularly for parent companies. A lot of feedback that it was understood why we were asking for it for applicants and their directors, but the further removed the fit and proper people were from the applicant, the more concern about the burden associated with that. And essentially a one-size-fits-all approach to applications that people think we adopt. A lot of feedback that we should be more tailored with our approach. Consistent with FRA, concerns about timeliness and engagement, which we've taken on and we're remedying outside of the project. Transparency, but communication where applications are up to, where there's concerns, whether we can communicate them to service providers, and issues with the application form. And finally, technology issues. So issues about difficulties with that portal, the 10 meg size limitation on the provision of proofs came up very regularly. Concerns about our application form and essentially the very old-fashioned way that we require for AFSL the provision of email documentation, which is not particularly secure and or user-friendly. Those are the key themes. There's a lot more detail. We hope to share that with the licensing liaison group in time. I'm going to now move to our recent licensing reforms. So just to give you an idea of what we did in the last 12 months in terms of reform work, and then I'll throw it to my colleague Gerard, who will go through what's coming up. So at a high level, foreign financial service providers is a ongoing source of reform work. We have 20 people who have a foreign AFSL. That is a AFSL that's subject to fewer general obligation requirements due to class order. The government is reviewing what the regulation of FSPs should look like. As a result of that consultation, there's transitional relief that means that FFSPs do not need to hold a licence. That's now been extended to the 31st of March 2024. We've still got 14 applications on hold because people want to see what the outcome is going to be of that consultation. Insurance claims handling, as Ping mentioned, that was a really big source of the uptick to the number of applications we had on foot. We received most of those in May and June in 2021. Relatively high number, 65 new applications that needed to people we weren't aware of, and 236 variations. The way the transitional arrangements worked, we had to ensure that we assessed those applications, and we had made a decision by the 1st of January 2022. We were able to achieve that. However, there was a knock-on effect on other applications. We had to reprioritise the assessment of those applications, which unfortunately did have an impact on certain other types of applications and a slippage more generally in our KEIs. As Ping flagged in the data, we are back on track now. Debt management firms is another major reform in the last financial year. We received 107 applications. Again, there were transitional arrangements which obliged licensing to try and make a decision on these applications as soon as we could. We've granted 65 licenses to debt management firms. They can be found on our licensing register. We would want to flag that we did see a really high withdrawal rate from applicants after they had lodged an application. So 3 times as many applicants in the debt management space withdrew their applications following feedback from ASIC that they were unlikely to meet the obligations that applied to credit licensees, compared to just a business as usual credit application. It's clear that this unregulated population, there was a larger proportion that just weren't able to meet the obligations of being a credit licensee. Just finally, from me, we also had some significant work in relation to corporate collective investment vehicle scheme, commenced on the 1st of July. To date, we've licensed 3 corporate directors. We have and will continue to prioritise these applications when they're received. So approach to prioritising that is outlined in Info 240. and we're more than happy to engage if anyone has any questions about those applications. We also engage in a process to offer ASIC initiated variations to intermediaries who could provide advice in relation to management investment schemes, which are very close to these corporate collective investment vehicle schemes. But they did not have authorisations for securities, so we engage in a process to offer those licensees a chance to have their licence amended. So from day one, they'd be able to provide advice on corporate collective investment vehicles, or just like they could with their managed investment schemes. So we received 105 requests to make those variations, and they have been finalised. Okay, I'll throw to Jared.
Thanks, Nick. Good morning, everyone. Before we get to your questions, I'm going to now briefly speak to some other topical matters that are relevant to licensing's work. Consistent with the theme of embracing innovation, I'd like to start with a plug for our enhanced regulatory sandbox, about which many of you would be aware. The sandbox provides an environment for people to test certain innovative and financial services and credit activities without the need to hold an AFS or credit licence. There are currently 8 participants using the sandbox, details of which are available on our website, as well as further details about the sandbox and how to engage with ASIC's Innovation Hub. Moving on to the subject of FAR, the regime, not the register. Those of you that are following would be aware that the financial accountability regime bills have been reintroduced to Parliament. The FAR is currently expected to commence for ADIs 6 months after royal assent, and for superannuation trustees and insurers a year after that. One of our core strategic projects, ASIC continues to work closely with APRA to implement the regime through guidance, industry engagement and effective registration processes. Subject to the passage of legislation, we'll work together with APRA to facilitate a smooth implementation. A brief comment on the subject of crypto. ASIC's information sheets are available to help persons understand their obligations under the Corporations and ASIC Acts relating to crypto asset businesses. As outlined in our corporate plan, we will also support the development of an effective regulatory framework focused on consumer protection and market integrity, following on from the recent consultation by Treasury and also the new government's recent announcements. We anticipate planned work will help identify how crypto assets and related services should be regulated. It would be remiss of us not to take the opportunity, given recent events, to also highlight the importance of cyber and operational resilience of regulated entities. This is again a focus of ASIC's 8 core strategic projects, as mentioned by Joe Bird earlier. We do expect entities to take action to reduce cybersecurity risk and reduce the potential of harm to their consumers, while also acknowledging risks can't always be fully mitigated. Complementary to our work in this area, licensing are also considering what we will request of applicants as part of an application process. And just finally, and probably apt, we'd also like to take the opportunity to mention that in addition to the REU's licence engagement case study, portal engagement initiatives, we are making other stakeholder engagement changes, including in response to the feedback received through the recent roundtables and surveys mentioned by both Peng and Nick. These changes also focus on improving our transparency, our accessibility and our responsiveness. We encourage you to provide feedback either directly and also through the surveys that will now encompass an application. We have provided our details as part of the pack today for the management team, so I encourage you, in addition to those surveys, if you do have feedback, please feel free to reach out directly. That's it from me, thank you, and we'll now open to the floor for questions. I think Peng's going to come to the microphone. Thank you.
Okay, maybe go back to that last slide, Nick. Just in case you don't know, we've got, you might have encountered some of these other people, but there's a few new names on our list. So this is the Senior Licensing Management Group. And we've got Marco Lamb and Jim Lau, who have joined the licensing team in the recent little while. And they're people who you'll be encountering through our assessment processes, as well as extra people that you can reach out to. Jim has joined us to cover for Nicholas, who will be going to work almost dedicated on the licensing portal work. So you can see that we're obviously going to focus a lot of our attention on making sure that that works in the way intended.